We're going to talk today about threat hunting. We're going to talk about bringing the joy back into threat hunting. So I'm Andy Scree. I'm the VP of Worldwide Sales Engineering for Exabeam. As I'd mentioned, as customer number 2, previously worked at eBay. I've been here for just a little over 4 years. Joined eBay kind of during their major breach about 5.5 years ago, helped them build their SOC post-breach, and brought Exabeam in on top of Splunk to really help sift through all that data and help us focus on where to prioritize our time and our tasks. And then before eBay, I was a manager at KPMG, where I was helping some of the world's largest organizations increase their maturity and decrease their risk, really focused around security operations. So today we're going to talk about threat hunting. We're going to talk about what threat hunting is today for most organizations, where we need to bring threat hunting where it should be. We're going to talk really about moving away from IOCs and focusing on TTPs and behavior. We're going to talk about some of the shortcomings about TTPs and why we really need to pair TTPs and analytics to help us understand what's really going on and where to focus and prioritize our time. And then we're going to talk about the different types of threat hunting you can do in Exabeam. So I want to spend 10-15 minutes on a presentation and then really dig into demos, right, and show you guys where to start threat hunting. How do you get the most out of Exabeam and really find those things that are interesting? So if we look at kind of traditional threat hunting, it's oftentimes focused on IOCs or threat intelligence, right? So it's a lot of loading threat lists in, doing matches, doing correlation. And this is where people spend a lot of their time. They're looking at file names, hashes, IP addresses. So you have a list here. This is a list from the Department of Homeland Security related to Grizzly Steppe, or a Russian threat actor group. This is where we're spending a lot of our time, is matching IOCs and trying to find these things that we know are already bad. And to me, if I'm threat hunting off an indicator of compromise, I'm not really threat hunting. I already know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something bad. I'd rather have this detected in real time than have to go back retroactively and say, hey, did this IP exist in my environment anywhere? There's a lot of challenges with IOCs, right? First one is they're single dimensional. It's an IP address, it's a domain, it's a hash. Now we can get around some of this single dimensionality with things like SIM and open IOCs, where I can correlate and say, if this file hash exists and this user hit this domain, then it's a problem. They oftentimes lack context. I get a list of IPs and domains and hashes. So I have this IP address and I find it in my organization. I don't know what part of the kill chain does this IP exist. Was this the external attacker just scanning my firewalls and my external presence? Was that the beginning of the attack? Was this bad IP used for exfiltration? Was it used for command and control? I don't know. So as soon as I detect something that is bad, I have to do a whole investigation to figure out, am I really compromised? Is it a problem, or is it something that my firewall took care of? It blocked that IP address inbound. It's very reactive, right? All these things are known bad. So this means that someone has to have identified a threat, published this to some sort of IOC list or threat intelligence. So I'm not being proactive. These things have already happened. I have to wait for somebody else to be affected by this. If I'm patient zero, I'm kind of out of luck, right? I'm never going to be able to find these things using IOCs. They're valid for only a short period of time. And often they're polymorphic within attacks, right? So I actually took an IP address out of that Grizzly Steppe list and I put it into VirusTotal. And you can see in VirusTotal, every single day, this particular IP address is serving up a different executable. So if I'm chasing file hashes and file names, every single day I'm behind the attacker, because he's just going to keep changing this. It's very easy to change IOCs. It's much harder for your attacker to change their TTPs or their behavior. They're going to be doing the same things over and over, but they can really quickly and easily change their IOCs. And this is where we're spending a lot of our time and effort, is chasing IOCs. And this leads to a high degree of false positives and oftentimes a false sense of security. And if you're not chasing IOCs or threat hunting off threat intel or indicators, you may be trying to build visualizations and identifying anomalies through logs, right? I was doing this a lot at eBay, doing stats counts in Splunk and trying to visualize and find these things that are standing out. But if I want to do this, I have to first start with a hypothesis. I have to know what I'm looking for when I threat hunt. So here I might say, you know what, I want to look at my Okta logs, and I want to find a user that's failing to log in with some failure reason that I'm not used to seeing. Because I'm seeing a lot of login failed or authentication failed. But here I'm going to build a visualization or a chart, and I can see there's a clear indicator that's standing out here. So I craft my search. But this is hard, right? You have to have analysts that know what they're looking for. They have to know the right search language, how to build these visualizations. You can't just put an L1 in to start to threat hunt for these things. And I'm going to have to modify my time frames. I might start with an hour, and I might not find anything interesting. I might look at 7 days or 24 hours. I'll always be slicing and dicing and looking at large volumes of data. And anytime we go down this route of saying, I'm going to visualize my logs, this is much better done in analytics by building a data model. If I know what I'm looking for and I'm trying to identify an anomaly, I should define this in a data model and let the analytics and the machines do this kind of detection in real time without having to put humans on trying to identify these things by combing through data. So some of you may have seen this before. This is the threat hunting pyramid of pain. Right? And if you look at the pyramid, we're spending most of our time at the bottom. We're chasing hashes and IP address and domains because they're the easiest things to chase. As you move up the pyramid of pain, it gets harder. And this is where TTPs and tools exist. And this is where we should be focusing our threat hunting efforts. This is really where X-Beam is going to help. Right? Leveraging the advanced analytics to identify those TTPs and those tools. Yes, we can do all of those other things in Data Lake and in other tool sets, but let's focus on those hard things. And how can X-Beam make those hard things easier? And how can we get your most junior person up that pyramid of pain looking at TTPs? So if you're not familiar with TTPs, what is a TTP? It's a tactic, technique, or procedure. Right? These are much more descriptive in nature than an IOC. This is going to tell you what an attacker does, why they do it, and how they do it. And these can be abstracted across threat actor groups and even campaigns. Right? If I'm looking at a file hash, I know that this bad hash exists for this threat actor and this particular campaign, versus a TTP or behavior, which is going to look across multiple different threat actor groups. So here's a snapshot of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. If you're not familiar, X-Beam's using and putting a lot of time and resources in MITRE. I think my colleague in the engineering track is talking right now about where X-Beam's going with MITRE ATT&CK framework, how we're labeling all of our rules within X-Beam solution, and even giving you the ability to threat hunt off of the TTPs. But MITRE is all about behavior. This is telling you across real attacks, what is MITRE seeing? What do attackers do? And there's something like 250 TTPs that exist in the MITRE framework. So I'd much rather put my analysts looking at 250 TTPs than hundreds of millions of IOCs floating around the internet. So if we drill into a particular TTP, we're going to talk about account creation. I'm going to use this throughout, and I'm going to show you this in the demo as well. But attackers love to use account creation for persistence. If they don't have to install malware and get tripped up by some legacy AV, they'd much rather go to your domain or a local system and create a new account and hide under plain sight. Right? They're going to hide under the radar. So MITRE tells us, why do attackers use this? What do they do it for? And they even tell us, how do we detect it? Right? They're going to tell us, one, we need to collect the right event codes, 4720s. But I love this. They say we should do regular audits and look for domain and local system accounts that look suspicious. What's a regular audit? Is that hourly, daily, weekly? And what the heck is suspicious? Right? I'm going to have somebody in my organization that knows who creates accounts, what are the naming conventions, at what time, in order to detect any of this kind of stuff. And it's even going to tell me what threat actor groups use this. So I see APT3, I see Dragonfly, Flame. So if I'm able to identify this TTP as suspicious or malicious, I can potentially catch a lot of different threat actor groups. Now, TTPs are great, but there's also some challenges. Right? And the challenge is these TTPs that attackers often leverage are the same things your admins do and the same things that are happening in your environment. Right? And these are the things that go under the radar. I guarantee almost everyone in this room has an admin in your organization who put their credentials in a script and they look like they're brute forcing after they change their password. Right? So how do I look at that? Right? This is happening every single day. Same thing with RDP. You allow RDP. You have users doing it as part of their job. How do I find when it's suspicious or out of the norm? PowerShell. Attackers love PowerShell, so do your admins. This is how they get their job done. So I can't just look at every single PowerShell activity in the environment and start to threat hunt or analyze it. I need the machines to do this work for me. So these are all of the things that are happening every single day in your logs. And if you just focus on the behavior, you're still going to be drowning, right? You're still going to be underwater. And this is why we need to pair the TTPs with analytics. And this is what the advanced analytics solution does so well. It puts the machines to work. So on the left-hand side, you're seeing some of the techniques from APT3. And everything in red are your standard IOCs, what you would traditionally threat hunt for. So APT3 uses scheduled tasks for persistence. So if I'm kind of in the legacy mindset of doing threat hunting and I want to see am I affected by APT3, I may go look for those things in red, which is the name of the service, my SC or my service, and the file, test.exe, the process for that service. Right? But now that this is published, APT3 probably is not using test.exe anymore. right? So you may look for it, but you're probably on a fool's errand. What you should do is let the machine do the work. Bring these logs into Exabeam and let Exabeam tell you, hey, I have a service being installed on a host, and I've never seen a service installed on this host before. Or even unusual process for a service, or unusual name of a process across the organization. And then I'm going to show you, we're going to threat hunt for those anomalies in these activities. Same thing with uncommonly used ports, right? That name, right? Common, uncommonly. I need to know what is normal. And so I don't want to have to go into my environment and say, show me all the ports that have been used in the last 24 hours and do a stats count and find those ones that are rare. Let the machine do this. Let the machine tell me, hey, I have a process or a port that's being connected to that I've never seen. This server is making a connection on a port that I've never seen, or to a geolocation. Same thing with PowerShell. It's being run all the time. I don't want to know who's running PowerShell. I want to know, is a user running PowerShell and they've never done it? They're running 600 PowerShell commands. They usually only run 4 or 5. They have encrypted arguments in their PowerShell commands. These are the things that the machine should bubble up. And then we're going to give you that ability to go threat hunt and identify those things. Same with RDP and the account creation. So I want to spend most of our time actually digging into different environments and doing some threat hunting. So one of the things I see for organizations they struggle with is they don't know where to start threat hunting. I think this is the biggest barrier to entry, right? You may start with portions of the kill chain or TTPs. What I'm going to show you today is where you can kind of start your threat hunting with an Exabeam, different kind of pivot points and starting points. We're going to start by looking at data models, right? Exabeam builds a ton of data models, probably millions in each one of your environments. And we're going to look at how can we search data models in Exabeam to start to identify rare values and things of interest that I can then threat hunt for and ask and answer questions very quickly. We're going to talk about starting very broad with activity types. Just saying, hey, let me look at all my users who have VPN'd in, and then focusing on those things that look rare or suspicious or risky. We're going to start with threat hunting for asset labels and user labels. I want to know which of my critical servers have the highest risk, or which of my privileged users are doing things that they've never done before. We'll talk about threat hunting for risk scores. Right, we know that notable in Exabeam is 90 points and above. But what about those things that didn't quite make it to notable? Kind of that soft, squishy middle layer. Could have been one anomaly that would have pushed it over the edge. But if I've handled all my notable users for the day, let me look at those ones that didn't quite make it to notable. That's where I should focus my threat hunting exercise. We'll talk about hunting for data uploads, if you care about data exfiltration. I want to look at large data uploads, and not just users that uploaded 100 megs, because you have users that do this every day. I want to start there and look at users who uploaded 100 megs, but I want to find those users who did it abnormally. We're going to talk about starting with anomalies, right? Looking at those individual risk reasons of those anomalies. How do I say, hey, I want to find a user who created an account for the first time that they've never done that before? A very specific threat hunt. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about how we can start to automate threat hunting using Incident Responder. Right, we need to leverage Exabeam's watch list more, especially when it comes to threat hunting. And I'll show you how you can create a quick playbook that says, hey, if this anomaly fires in my environment, automatically add this user and asset to a watch list, and I can have someone follow up with it. Right, then I don't have to have my analyst running this threat hunt search every day. I can start to automate and just have these users bubble up on a watch list. So let's pivot over into a couple different demo systems. And we're going to start with threat hunting off of data models. So let's go ahead. So data models are really key in Exabeam, right? This is how we learn what is normal. And we build data models off of different scope types. So we build data models for your users. What does this user do? For his peer groups, what is normal for this peer group? And sometimes for the organization, what have I seen across the org? And so there's kind of a little hidden feature, if you will, called data insights. And data insights here gives you the ability to search any of the data models that Exabeam's built in your environment. So I can start to look at these different data models and potentially identify something I want to know more about. And so we can just type in a model name. And I don't have to know exactly what model I'm looking for. We have a cheat sheet, so if you want to learn all of our different data models, but I could put a keyword in here. I'm going to say countries. Now I'm seeing all the different data models Exabeam builds related to countries and access from different geos. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to use models the countries that users perform activity across the org. So this model is modeling any time I see a user doing something in my organization from a source IP that's not internal. So it could be VPN access, it could be access to cloud applications. And here's my data model. I can see what's pretty normal, United Kingdom, US. What I'm going to do over and over that you're going to see in this is anytime I look at a data model or I threat hunt, I go to the bottom. right? I don't care about these things that happen all the time. I want to find those things that don't happen all the time. So I'm going to scroll to the bottom. I'm going to find these geolocations where I see one access, two accesses. And so I can scroll up and I can see here, Hong Kong, right? So now I want to know, well, who came in from Hong Kong? What did they do in my environment? Was it potentially bad or not? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take Exabeam's Threat Hunter. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to use the geolocation portion of Threat Hunter and start to look at this activity. I'm going to say, show me Hong Kong. I'm going to go to the last 90 days. Really quickly, I can see I have one user who's come in from Hong Kong twice. I can also see really quickly that this is basically on the same day, just a couple minutes apart. So it's good, right? I don't have a lot of different users doing this. I only saw it a couple times. She doesn't have a ton of activity, right? 8 events, 5 events. So I want to know a little bit more about this senior VP, Tina. So I open up Tina's profile. I see at the top here, she's located in the United States. So it's not like she's located in Hong Kong and she's VPNing from her home country. She's in the US. I also see when I scroll down here, the anomalies related to this activity. So we did trigger this anomaly. It's the first time we'd ever seen anyone come in from Hong Kong. It's also telling me this user doesn't have a whole lot of activity or history. What we're seeing from the risk timeline here is the first time I ever see Tina pop up in Exabeam, she's coming in from Hong Kong and no one else has ever done that. So why do I have a senior VP located in the US, and the first time I ever see her in Exabeam, she's coming up from a geolocation I've never seen before? Now, we could say, well, maybe that's normal, right? Maybe she actually is in Hong Kong and she's been there for a month and she continues to VPN in and we're going to have to learn that behavior. Well, I can also look at her data models. So we kind of started this exercise off a data model. Now I can look at Tina's individual data models and say, well, where does she normally connect on the VPN? What has Exabeam learned? Well, I've seen her from the UK twice. And we saw in the geolocation data model that the UK was the most common place. And I've only seen her from China once, or from Hong Kong. So it's not like this is becoming normal. It's not like she's continuing to do this. So this is one of those scenarios, right, where I may want to reach out to Tina. I might want to check some travel records. I might want to reach out to her boss. Why is she coming in from Hong Kong for the very first time? And that's the first activity I've ever seen from her, right? This is a way to start with the data model and start to threat hunt and find those things that might be interesting. So that's one way to start threat hunting. And we have tons of different data models. So I may want to look at things like categories. So we can look at web categories, or we could look at account management. I go to a lot of organizations, and I say, well, how many users in your environment create accounts or add users to OUs? And say, we have 5 or 10 accounts. They're service accounts. And I'll open up this data model, and I'll say, you told me you had 5 or 10 accounts? I see 26 different users doing account management across your organization. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, here's an admin, an admin, an admin. And I'll scroll to the bottom. And I'll say, well, who are these few users who are doing account management that you didn't know about? Right? It may not be a threat, but this could be against policy. Right? You want to get a better handle on which users actually have these privileges. And we can use this data model. I could also do this in Exabeam's data lake, but I'm going to have to search event codes over 90 days and wait for that result to return. This data model I can pull up in a matter of seconds. So we can really use these data models to help us, again, figure out how do we start threat hunting? What's our pivot point into starting to search in Exabeam's Threat Hunter? Now, the next thing we can do from a threat hunting perspective is we can go back to Tina, right? So we saw Tina come in from Hong Kong, and she had that anomaly, first activity from a geolocation for a user. So I may also now say, well, if Tina did that for the first time, who are any other users that have come in from a geo that we've never seen? And so I can take that one user and I can say, okay, now show me any other user, first activity from country for the organization. So I can take one user and I can now pivot off of a particular anomaly and say in the last 30 days, I've got a couple users here that are coming in from geolocations that I've never seen. Right? And the idea here is when I threat hunt in Exabeam, I'm okay with being wrong or finding things that aren't a real threat because it doesn't take me that much time to actually go and say, actually, that's not a threat or it's not something I care about or not interesting. I'm not spending hours digging through log data trying to figure out when this user came in from this geolocation, what do they do? Was it normal? Was it not? Right? I can make mistakes. I can do threat hunts that end in no results at all, and that's okay because I can just spend my time continuing to drill in and dig into these things very quickly. So the other way we can start very high level and broad through threat hunting, I'm going to go to my other system here, is through activity types. So one of the nice things about using threat hunter and activity types is I can go into organizations that I know nothing about. Right? I don't know their business model. I don't know what they do. I don't know who their users are. And I can just search for activity types and start to be a very good threat hunter without knowing anything about the organization or any context. So let's take activity types. Right? We have a whole bunch of them out of the box, different activity types, account management, VPN. You can also create your own and extend this. It's configurable. But we were talking a little bit about persistence and account creation. So let me find out who's doing account creation in my environment. So I'm going to say, let's do account management. And I'm just going to search for this particular activity type. And I see I got quite a few results, 2,500. What I'm going to do now is I want to filter that data down a little bit further. So I'm going to go to my event types. I'm going to say, OK, when account management happened, I really care about account creation. So still, quite a few users. This is what MITRE would tell you to do. Look at all the account creation and try and eyeball and find things that are suspicious. Right? We know that that's not going to work across 2,500 different users. So what we can do is analytics is going to tell me which one I should probably look at first, right? By risk, 471 points of risk. Before I drill into any user when I threat hunt, I never go directly to the timeline. The first thing I do is I pop open the risk reasons. What happened in this session, and is it interesting to me? So this user did account creation. I don't know if it's good or bad, normal, not, but I know in this session this user had a suspicious NTLM login. She escalated her privileges to a privileged account, and she's doing some account management for the first time. So let's find out what she did. So we drill into her timeline. And I'm going to use my KPIs at the top because I care about account creation. This is kind of what I'm looking for from a TTP. And I go to her account creation activity. And what do I see? Well, she's creating an account, zero cool. She's doing it from an asset where we've never seen account management. She herself has done account management before, but not from this asset. Right? We can tell you which accounts or which assets she typically does account management from. And we're also seeing that the domain that she's creating this account on is abnormal for her. Right? We don't typically see her create accounts on KT Energy. So again, I can look at trying to build correlation rules around weird account management, but I might forget about looking at the asset from where this is occurring or even the domain. But really quickly, I can just start in Threat Hunter saying, give me the activity types of account management and creation, and it's prioritizing which ones I should look at first. Now, the other one that I really like to do from an account activity perspective is account creation on the VPN. This is something that we looked at eBay as part of the red team quite frequently, because our red team would go ahead and use account creation as persistence. And oftentimes they do it on the VPN, which our domain admins rarely, if ever, did. So we can actually use account activity types. And I'm going to go ahead and once again, I'm going to select account management. One of the things you can do here is actually there's built-in Boolean logic in the account types with an AND. So I can say, show me all account management and VPN. I'm going to go ahead and search that. So again, it's given me quite a large list, quite a few users. But then again, I'm going to filter down on event types. Now, in this demo environment, it's dummy log data, so I have 1,600 users doing this. I challenge you, go do this in your environment. See how many users that you find creating new accounts while they're on the VPN. And what XMe is also going to tell you is when those account creations are occurring, is there any anomalies related to that VPN access? Is it from a new device, a new geolocation, a new IP address? It's going to find some really interesting things if you see these things occurring in your environment. The other activity type that I love to work with is security alerts. Right? We all have bought security tools. We have a lot of organizations, 30, 40 different security tools. Most of them generate alerts, try and take your eyes off here and there. This is important, this is important. So we can use XBeam to help prioritize which security alerts actually make sense and which ones are meaningful. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the security alerts event type. And here I have 300 or 200 and 400 security alerts. So which one do I look at first? Well, I could obviously look at, again, the riskiest ones. So I may say, well, I'm going to look at Howard Osborne here. And I can look at his alert and say, this is a Symantec Vontu. Maybe I'm looking for malware. I don't care about the DLP, so I can just move on from this, right? It really quickly allows me to know, is this something I should look at or not? I may look and say, well, let me look at how many alerts the user has. So I can scroll down this page and see this is 2 alerts, 2 alerts, 2 alerts. Sometimes you're going to find users with 500 security alerts on a given day. Well, maybe I should look at that and see what's happening. Or rather than looking at all 400 of these, let's look at different event types. Again, I'm going to take this, I'm going to scroll to the bottom of the list. I have users that have security alerts. They had a USB insert, email received, batch logon. Right? Batch logins typically happen with my service accounts. So do I have a service account that had a security alert? That might be interesting. Let's drill in. Looks like I do. I have a service account. Looks like on 3 different sessions, it had security alerts. Now again, I want to know more about this without having to do a whole lot of investigation. Let me look at the events. What did this service account do when it got a security alert? Here we go. So I see account creation. I see account switches. I see application activities and email. Why do I have a service account sending email? Right? Do I have a real user using the service account, either against policy, or has this account been compromised? And I now have an actual threat actor using the service account. It's got a security alert. It's sending emails, doing application activities. Now think about this. I didn't start my threat hunting saying, I want to identify service accounts sending email. I just said, show me all my security alerts, and then filter down and prioritize what to look at. Now, I certainly could say and take this and say, now let me do my next threat hunt and find any service accounts across my organization also sending email. Maybe it's not just this one. But again, I don't have to be very specific in what I want to look for when I threat hunt an Exabeam. I can start very broad and just pare it down from there and really identify things that are interesting, that would probably go under the radar and not be detected. So we've talked about data model threat hunting. We've talked about event types. The next thing we're going to look at is threat hunting off of risk scores. All right, so if you think about it again, right, 90 points is notable. What's happening just below notable? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use a threat hunt for risk scores. So let's go ahead and let's look at everything from a risk score that was 70 to 89. Right? What happened just before notable? Because again, it could have been one other anomaly that would have triggered this over the edge. And if I have 10, 15, 20 notables a day and my team has handled those, I want to find those next things. So again, I have 22 users, right? Not a whole lot, just about notable. We see 85, 80 points. Again, I'm going to filter down. I'm going to look at different event types. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scroll down here. And I see at the bottom remote logon. Right? So I know that remote logon, RDP, often used for lateral movement. Let's go ahead and take a look at remote logon. This user, 70 points of risk. Matthew, if anyone was part of the hackathon, you'll probably recognize this user last night. But we go into his timeline. So what do we see? Well, one, some physical access anomalies. So he's accessing the building at an abnormal time. Haven't seen him come in at 150. But we scroll down and we see this is the first remote login for the user. We've never seen him do an RDP or an SSH before. We see him RDP or SSH here to a Nix server. Once he's on that Unix server, he actually escalates his privileges to the Nix admin. And right below that, we can actually see with his own credentials, he's trying to get a file share domain. Right? He's actually trying to download Google Drive through GitHub, and it's blocked. So one of the things we want to do probably is figure out, well, once he SSH'd to that Unix server, what did he do on that box? I can quickly pivot and say, show me everything that Exabeam knows about this device. And I can go into the device timeline. And I can see he RDP'd into the device. We knew he escalated his privileges to the Nix admin, but he further escalated his privileges from the Nix admin to the root account. And we can see with that root account, what is he doing? Well, he's doing a wget for G Drive. Right? He couldn't do it with his regular credentials, so now he's using his escalated or elevated privileges. We can see he does a G Drive list, and even tries to cover his tracks a little bit by removing his bash history. And one of the nice things is I don't have to figure out then what did he do the next day. I just scroll down and I can see all of that activity. Same thing, RDPs to the server, escalates privileges, escalates again. We can actually see from down here, now he's actually uploading my customer logistics DB. So again, I'm starting my threat hunt. I'm not looking for exfiltration. I'm not looking for a user escalating privileges or abusing privileges. I just started with, hey, what hasn't bubbled up yet? Where should I focus my time and attention? And I'm really able to quickly pivot from a user to an asset and see exactly everything that's happening. Right? I didn't have to craft a single search. I didn't have to wait for search results to return. The ability to quickly pivot in Exabeam is something that I've found saves organizations a ton of time. Right? It's very easy to do. So that's how we threat hunt off of risk scores. We also might want to threat hunt off of labels. Right? So I want to say, what have my privileged users been up to? I have any risky privileged users or critical assets? And here I'm going to get a list of all the privileged users in my environment, not that have done anything wrong, but all of them prioritized by risk. And once again, I could pick on Rob here, who's got the highest risk, 92 points. But again, I'm going to use event types. I'm going to scroll down and say, OK, what do I have here? Well, I have an account lockout. I have a privileged user locking themselves out. And it doesn't happen very often in my environment, so I probably want to look at it. And I drill in. And I see two things. I see the asset. Jay Coleman's the asset. And I can see the user, Jim Coleman. Well, right away, without doing anything, I can pretty much tell you that Jay Coleman, the asset, is related to Jim Coleman. It's probably his machine. So I have a privileged user locking himself out on his own machine. It's probably not that risky. Versus if I saw Jim Coleman's privileged account locking out on machines that he didn't know or devices that he's never accessed. Furthermore, I can click on Jim here, and we can look at his risk timeline. I can say, let's see everything Jim's been up to the last month. And 0 points of risk. It's really flat. Again, probably not something I need to spend a whole lot of time on. But it's one of those things that I can quickly ask these questions and get the answer back that, yeah, maybe I don't need to worry about it. Maybe I do want to add Jim to a watch list. Maybe I want to keep an eye on him. But from here, I can see that I probably don't need to spend a ton of time looking at Jim and his behavior. Now, one of the very specific ways to threat hunt is on risk reasons. Right? These are the individual anomalies that XBeam has fired. Right? And so if you go into XBeam's risk reasons here and type in the word first, you're going to get a whole list of all the different anomalies that include the word first. Right? And you could start to threat hunt off of these and say, has this anomaly ever fired in my environment? But there's hundreds of these. Right? You don't want to just throw in risk reasons willy-nilly and see what comes back, because oftentimes maybe you don't have the logs to actually trigger that anomaly. So what you should do, and what I do for my customers, is every time XBeam generates an anomaly, we write a log. We can take that log and syslog it into your existing SIEM, into our data lake, and we can build dashboards around these risk reasons, these anomalies, so you can figure out where do you actually focus your time and attention. So that's kind of what I've done here. If you look at our XBeam data lake, I built a pretty basic visualization. I'm looking at the rare anomalies. I don't care about that anomaly that fires 10,000 times every week. I care about that anomaly I've never seen in your organization since XBeam's installed. Things like I have a user with an abnormal number of accesses to hosts across the organization. This is what you're going to see when you have lateral movement. This user's accessing machines that he's never accessed before or in higher volumes. So this is how you use risk reasons. Don't start by just typing in risk reasons and seeing if they fire. Use an approach where you're looking at the rare risk reasons. So syslog this back into the XBeam data lake, your existing SIEM. This is going to help you identify those things that really matter in the environment. So case in point, let's go back into my environment. And I know a rare risk reason. We're going to stay on the persistence, first account creation activity for a user. I know that this is a rare anomaly in my environment. It's a very specific threat hunt. And I go ahead and I search it. And what do I have? 2 users. Well, I can see one of my users was 180 points, which means that he was notable. I probably already had someone investigate this user as part of my daily triage. But I got a user with 40 points here. Right? So let's drill into this timeline. Well, I can see really quickly 2 sessions. One where this user created an account for the first time, first account management for this particular user. And the next day he deletes this account. Right? So the account wasn't used for very often or very long. It wasn't in the environment. So I can open this up and say, well, this is the account that was created. Now what do I want to do? This user service account created an account, deleted it the next day. Now I want to know, did anyone use this account while it was created and active in my environment? Well, I can really easily do this. Go back to my threat hunter. I'm going to say, just show me everything for 90 days. And then I'm going to filter on the account names. So if I filter on account names, I can put in this user. And I can say, who used this credential while it was active in my environment? Well, obviously, this user shows up, right, as its own user, because these events happen in this user timeline. But I can also see my VP here use this particular credential. He also used 5 other accounts on this particular day. Just think about that. That's really powerful. I can see account creation happening. Users creating an account for the first time, and I can track back and find out who actually used that account in that day when it was actually active in my environment. And I get that full timeline and everything that happened around it. So this is that ability to be very specific, right? Risk reasons. I like to start as broad as possible until you got a really good handle around your environment and kind of know your anomalies. But once you do understand your anomalies and you can visualize them and focus on those risky or the rare ones, using risk reasons and drilling directly into anomalies is going to find really interesting things in the environment. So now that we've got an understanding of Threat Hunter a little bit more, let's talk about how do we automate some of this. So I don't have to have an analyst come in and run these Threat Hunter searches every single day. We can certainly save them, right? So this is something that you guys should leverage, is save your Threat Hunter searches. So I've created one that looks at possible APT3, right? And it's got a lot of different risk reasons. I don't want to have to run this every single day, right? Or put in these values, so I save this. And I say, which users in my environment look like they might have the same TTPs as a particular threat actor group? But we can automate this even further using Exabeam's Incident Responder. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up my settings page here. What I've done is I've gone ahead and I've configured Exabeam's Incident Responder to query the data lake for a particular anomaly. So I'm coming into my incident sources, and I've gone ahead and I've created a new incident feed. And this incident feed is looking for a particular anomaly. It's looking for every time Exabeam's identified an unusual process for a particular scheduled task. So Exabeam's going to go now, Incident Responder is going to pull this log from Data Lake and create an incident. Now, after I've created this new incident type, I've gone ahead and I've defined a really quick, easy playbook that's going to take every time this particular anomaly happens, I'm going to take that user and just add them to a watch list. And then I can put my analyst on that watch list and say, anytime a user's on here, maybe it's worth an investigation or some sort of follow-up. So I've gone ahead and I've created a new playbook. We scroll down here, scheduled process watch list. Pretty simple. It's one action, right? Takes this user, puts them on a watch list. And I've added this trigger, this condition, right? That says every time I have an incident created, right, with the incident name of unusual process for a scheduled task, add this user to a watch list. Right? We need to get better about automating these functions and these jobs. And it could be as simple as adding users to a watch list. I may want to know every time I have a user running a process I've never seen in the environment, put them on a watch list. It might only score 5 risk points because it's not that risky, but I should probably have someone follow up on that. I could even extend this further and say, don't just add to a watch list. If I have this process that's unusual, go ahead and grab that process off the endpoint, right? Detonate it in a sandbox. Get information about it, right? I'm starting very simple with a one-action playbook, but I could extend this to do full-scale automating of my threat hunting, right? Looking at these various aspects across the events. So I hope that you guys have a little bit better understanding of where to start with threat hunting. Again, the customers that I talk to from Exabeam that get the most value out of the solution use Threat Hunter every single day. This is not one of those things that you should touch once a month. Use it every single day. You don't have to exactly know what you're looking for. Start broad, start with event types, start with risk scores. But I guarantee you're going to find things in this system that may not be a security threat, but they're probably configuration problems or users doing things against policy. You're going to find really interesting things here that maybe didn't bubble up as notable, or you're going to catch things much sooner into an attack or into an insider threat. So with that, thank you. And I know we're about to have lunch, but if there are any questions, happy to answer.